Welcome to our explainer video. We chose to take a deeper look at literature, music, and art from the Romantic period in order to further develop our understanding of how people better understand themselves. The following video will be split up into 3 sections, catering to each of those 3 facets of culture. Oscar Wilde offered the bold observation of life imitates art. During the late 18th and early 19th century, art was another facet of culture in which Romanticism was deeply engraved. The influence of such landmark pieces such as The Nightmare by David Fuseli, The Ancient Days from Europe, A Prophecy by William Blake, and The Desperate Man by Gustave Courbet, simultaneously reflected and influenced the shift in culture towards the individual. In this section, we will be taking a deeper look into Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, 1818. This painting offers the perfect example of how Romanticism valued the primacy of the individual and contemplation. The most impactful tool through which the artist achieves this is through the simple yet stark color palette and shapes that draw the eye to the center point of the piece, the wanderer. This man, standing on the edge of a rock formation overlooking crashing waves and rolling hills, stands pensively. Using the darkest tones at the forefront, the viewer is attracted first to the jagged rocks on top of which the lone subject is standing, and then the subject's suit jacket. Such a minimal foreground further emphasizes the wanderer. The mountains exist in the vast and foggy background and even form a valley that almost creates arrows towards him. The dark tones and structured suit jacket also imply strength and power, while the light and soft background implies optimistic uncertainty, almost opportunity. This flips the typical color palette in which earlier paintings highlighted the foreground and shadowed the nature in the background on its head. From this dynamic, the vastness of the waves and mountains ahead seem almost welcoming instead of all-encompassing, shifting the power to the wanderer. The stick in his hand also implies the wanderer is on a long hike with the sole purpose of enjoying nature and focusing on his own internal monologue. All of these elements considered, we can observe how celebrated the individual was during this period. People started to break from the norms of their respective societal groups, like absolute monarchism in the Catholic Church, and were encouraged to develop their own unique thought. As Caspar Friedrich placed emphasis on the individual, we can see this theme echoed in the historical developments during this period in Western society, as sweeping as the switch from mercantilism to capitalism, which focuses on the individual consumer's choice, and the more abstract, like subjectivism, highlighting the relevance and need for mental care, thus beginning early behavioral therapy.
The fascination in childhood and the desire to recapture the innocent understanding of the world being one of the key features of Romanticism, the Romantic child became one of the key points that led to the birth of children's literature. The Romantic child represents intimacy and innocence with a capacity for wonder and joy. Like in the image shown, this model of Romantic child gives a warm feeling of nostalgia. Literature produced for children has always been influenced by a desire to protect the innocence of childhood and to control any wayward thought that might destroy that innocence. The preservation of these childlike qualities into adulthood is one of the main goals of Romanticism in literature. The emphasis placed on the freshness of childhood during a period of great change was seen as a factor that directly addressed children as an audience through a direct appeal to imagination. This appeal to their imagination was made possible through fiction, as many writers in that time believed it would be an effective way to communicate with their innocent minds. This led to the development of fairy tales and fantasies in literature. With this increased fascination of poets and writers with fairy tales and fantasies, this method of writing soon became prevalent, and it even began to challenge the customary stories. The roots of folk and fairy tales made them a useful model for narration in speaking to an audience. With childhood being considered as the state of heightened sensitivity to all things, rather than something to be grown out of and improved upon, fairy tales attracted those who wished to recover the childlike sensibility within. With narration, these means of telling literature offer an open text and invite the reader to share in the making of the meaning, which creates a different relationship between the author and reader. It creates a more democratic approach, which encourages the imaginative spirit rather than control it. Because of its nature and the way it made people feel, folk and fairy tales found its way into adult literature. One popular fairy tale from the 19th century is John Ruskin's The King of the Golden River. John Ruskin was an influential art critic and social philosopher. In his book, he employs the form of a fairy tale to emphasize the philosophies of Romanticism, with some examples being the importance of nature and the relationship between characters and their surroundings. In The King of the Golden River, the setting was in the mountains, which is normal, as it is usually mountains that trigger the sense of self-discovery for romantic writers. The book goes on to discuss some critical matters such as John's critique for the Victorian period and other political issues. It might seem strange that such important issues were represented in the form of a fairy tale, but deep in the children's story is the moral and philosophical reasoning that was used to express John's innermost thoughts. With the development of children's literature came literature that was about children. Ideas about the child influenced adult literature in the way poets such as William Blake in Songs of Innocence and Experience and William Wordsworth in Imitations of Immorality portray children for adult readers. Children were often featured in adult literature because of ideas about the children's closeness to nature.
In The Music Between Us, philosopher Karen Marie Higgins discusses music's uncanny ability to provoke, despite its myriad forms across continents and throughout centuries, the sense of shared human experience. In a nutshell, this quote is saying that music can communicate in ways that language often cannot. The emotions and passions stored in a song are not tied to a single set of people, but to the experiences every human shares, such as love, sorrow, and awe. While all music builds off this foundation, different periods express the human experience in different ways. In this section, we will delve into the unique qualities of the Romantic period's music and how it ties to the overall themes of individualism and the emphasis of emotion. Specifically, we will look at Friedrich Chopin's composition. Friedrich Chopin was born in Warsaw, which is current-day Poland, in 1810 during the peak of the Romantic period. From a young age, his talents in composition and performance were clear. By the age of 19, he was touring Europe and making a name for himself. While he was gifted with musical talent, he was surrounded by war, suffering, and solitude. These emotions became the defining qualities of much of his music. He is widely considered one of the pinnacle artists of the Romantic period. He is partially accredited for the popularization of the nocturne and etude format of piano composition. Looking at his music, there are three main distinguishing factors. First, he uses the full range of dynamics or loudness. Looking at Etude Opus 25, number 11, Winch and Wind, the dynamic jumps from pianissimo, which is very soft, to forte, loud, between measures 4 and 5. This harsh change in loudness surprises the listener and quickly captures their attention. Before the Romantic period, dynamics were standardized and pieces focused on fluidity. Harsh sounds were overall avoided. By embracing these stark changes in dynamics, Chopin sought to express the sorrow and briskness of his own life and surroundings. Romantic period music delved from its priors by expressing the extremity of life through extremity in music. Second, Chopin also utilized a wide tonal range. This manifested itself in large harmonic runs up and down the piano. An example of this can be seen in Etude Opus 10 number 12, the Revolutionary Etude. The melody chords are followed by harmonic arpeggio runs across the piano. While this was not unheard of before the Romantic period, Chopin and his fellow composers were the ones who tested its limits. Listening to the etudes, the songs are a fury of sounds with minimal use of breaks. Again, this technique was used to emphasize the extremity of life and emotion. Life has incredible highs and lows and isn't as monotonous and standardized as previously portrayed. Finally, Chopin's music emphasized the melody. Even with all the extremity in his songs, the melody always drove the direction of where the piece was going. For example, his Nocturne Opus 9 number 2 reserves the right hand for melody entirely, which drives the broken chord harmony in the left hand. This is almost necessary in his pieces because it ties together all the chaos into something beautiful. It creates another layer of depth to his music. Overall, Chopin and his counterparts sought to express the complexity of life in their music. The Romantic period brought way to seeing the individual as boiling over with emotion. The world was not as standardized as previously portrayed. It became more about how the person's own emotions affected their experiences than how their experiences shaped their emotions.